So let me introduce the first speaker, Brian Green from Santa Clara University. Thank you for being here. So Brian will talk about the Vatican and morality in technology. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. So today I'll be talking about some of the work that the Dicastery for Culture and Education has been doing with artificial intelligence. So as you can see here, there's a website online that you can go to that crosses pictures with each other. So you can take a picture of the Vatican and cross it with a circuit, and it looks like this. This is what the picture looks like previously. But and this is an older technique of AI, but it's one that's still I like it better than a lot of the newer techniques. All right, so brief outline for today. Once again, talking about some of the Dicastery for Culture and Education's work with this, and talking about what they've been doing with industry and also with academia. Then talking about what can be done to associate technology and churches. And then kind of our new task, looking at freedom and agency, and then the conclusion. So this is a picture taken from September of 2019, where the Holy Father is coming to speak on AI to a group of scholars there. You can see me way over on the side there, looking very happy. And Pope Francis then gave his remarks and delivered them. And there are many groups at the Vatican who are working on artificial intelligence. There's the Pontifical Academy for Life. They're working with the Rome Call for AI ethics. There's the Dicastery for Culture and Education, which is looking at it from the perspective of culture and the culture of technology, as well as how AI will operate in the educational system, which is a huge, huge question. The Pontifical Academy of Sciences has been working on this also. There have been dialogues with technology leaders, people who are, for example, CEOs of large technology companies will come to Rome and meet with the Pope. And more things than that. There are many, many of them. The two things that I've been working on with the Dicastery for Culture and Education is one strand that's looking at industry in particular. How can we help the technology industry make better choices and provide them with ethical ways of thinking ethically about their technology? And the second strand is more traditionally academic, bringing together groups of scholars from mostly the United States, but there are also some other groups that are now starting around the world or have been around for a while. And they have been doing having their own meetings. All right. So on the industry side, we have something called the ITEC initiative. ITEC stands for the Institute for Technology, Ethics, and Culture. And it's very much, once again, focusing on technology and the culture in technology companies. So not only the culture that technology produces in the world, but also the internal culture of those organizations, because every organization has an internal culture. This began because there were leaders in the tech industry who are Catholic and said, we would like to make sure that our company is thinking as ethically as possible. What can we do to incorporate these ethical methods of thinking into our organization? So we started working with various companies and eventually produced a book called the ITEC Handbook, which is a free book. It's online at the Markkula Center website. And you can download it, and once again, it's very much organizationally focused. So if you're trying to figure out how to transform an organization to think more about technology, then this would be the method to do that. It has 5 stages to it. The first stage is to decide that you actually want to transform your organization in this way. The reason this stage is so important is because very often technology companies will say, let's emphasize ethics, or let's talk about technology ethics and those sorts of things. And then 6 months later, they'll say, oh, this is getting to be really a hassle. It's too much work. Let's just go back to doing things the way we were doing them before. So the first step is to make sure that everyone actually really wants to make this happen, and especially at the leadership level of the chief executive officers, the level of the board of directors and those sorts of things. The next one is to do a culture assessment. You look at your organization, figure out what your internal culture already looks like. The third one is to figure out where you want to go. What do you want to look like when you're done with this transformation? The fourth step is to actually implement these changes into your organization. And this is a two-part implementation, one on the human resources side and then one on the engineering side of the organization. And then the last one is continuous improvement, or making sure that you're continuing on your journey. We like to use the metaphor of a road trip. You're going to drive somewhere. The first thing you do is you decide where you want to travel to. Then you decide where you are right now. You figure out where you are, because maybe you don't exactly know where you are. Then you figure out what the location is that is going to be your destination, and then you figure out the path in order to get there. And the last one is continuously monitoring your path there. All right, here's another perhaps recognizable style here. This is the mission church at Santa Clara at the university where I work, but crossed with Van Gogh's Starry Night. This is what it looks like when it does not have Starry Night put on top of it. All right, on the more academic side of the dicastery's work, we've put out 2 volumes so far. The first one is a traditional edited volume of a journal, the Journal of Moral Theology. Had a special issue on artificial intelligence that came out in 2022. I think it was about April of 2022. And then in December of 2023, we put out the document Encountering Artificial Intelligence, Ethical and Anthropological Investigations, which got into these issues in much more depth. So there are more books on the way. Our groups have been meeting for about 5 years now. So the first book that we put out was a culmination of basically 3 or 4 years of work. And as we are continuing meeting, we're moving on to new topics. The new topics, one of which, as I mentioned before, is AI and Catholic education. And the other one is freedom and agency. What will we actually be doing in the future when we have to think about all of the ways that AI is making choices for us, and how do we respond to that? So I'll talk a little bit about encountering AI as the document. It has 8 chapters, or 7 chapters. So AI and the human person sets the stage when we talk about what is artificial intelligence, what is a human person, how do they relate to each other. Consciousness, which is really the difference between human beings and AI. It's not even conceptualizable how AI could be conscious. There are many people working on this to try to make a conscious AI, but at the same time, there's no conceivable path forward to make this actually possible unless we reduce our understanding of human consciousness to being mechanical, in which case we have the question of whether it's actually consciousness anymore. Then encounterings or relationships with AI, seemingly personal AI. What should be our proper relationship with this kind of technology? And then, of course, how does this relate to God, and how does God play into this? The second part of the book is very ethically focused. So we look at AI and Catholic social teaching, making connections to the past, and then also we make these connections to all sorts of different areas of human life. So family, education, healthcare, law and politics, military, work in the economy, communication and culture, and then the natural world, bringing all of these together. And then lastly, we have recommendations for the future. And a lot of these overlap with ideas in the previous chapter, the sectors that I just talked about, but they get into kind of the more governance side of things also. All right, a few themes from the document include the kind of the basic idea, and these are just a few themes, not all of them. The idea that life is not about efficiency. AI is a technology that is predominantly about creating efficiency, where previously we did not have efficiency. Now we can create text in just seconds. We can create images in just a few seconds. Things that might have taken 1,000 hours of work previously can be done in mere minutes. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are the proper locations for efficiency to appear in our lives? For example, the family is not about efficiency. There are places in family life where efficiency might be helpful, but primarily that's not what families are about. Families are about expressing and receiving love. And so when we think about AI, we should think about what are the proper locations for this. one of the really dangerous locations where this appears is the idea of there are lots of apps now that give you an AI boyfriend or girlfriend, and you get to choose exactly what your AI boyfriend or girlfriend is going to be like, what their personality is going to be like, and all sorts of things of that sort. And we have to ask ourselves, is this actually good? Is this the type of efficient relationship that humans should be participating in, or is this a bad idea? And I think the answer is that it's a bad idea, in case you couldn't tell from what I was describing it. Other themes that are in the document, the idea of dependency on AI, of de-skilling of human beings, the idea of substituting AI for human beings, once again, whether it's relationally substituting them or in terms of work or other ways, the importance of solidarity and subsidiarity in the use of AI technology. Once again, the idea that technology is not neutral. Several people have spoken about that already. Technology is not neutral. It's always created for a purpose with the assumption that that purpose is good. And so we need to ask ourselves, is that purpose actually good? Avoiding consumerism also. AI-assisted healthcare. Healthcare, I think, is one of the most obvious places where AI is going to be beneficial if it is implemented correctly. The large amounts of healthcare data really provide a lot of opportunity for AI to help us there. There's the risk of AI bias, of course. The idea of what are you maximizing or optimizing for with AI, the default is towards money because that's what corporations want. But there are other things that you can maximize for. You can maximize towards goodness. You could try to maximize towards holiness, although what does that mean exactly is an interesting question. AI endangers our understanding of our own judgment and selves. It risks the loss of freedom in some ways. And also the idea of cheapening culture due to AI. And for that, I'm just going to present this image here. If a human being had painted this image, we would say, wow, that looks like it was a huge amount of work. But in the very center of the image, you see there's a tiny Christmas tree with 3 legs. And you say, why is there a Christmas tree with 3 legs walking around the middle of this picture? And the answer is that because when you create something like this with AI, it only takes a few seconds to create the image. And so you can create as many strange images as you want to, absurd things that you wouldn't necessarily spend 1,000 hours painting this image. But if you're only spending a few minutes, then maybe it becomes okay to do that. But then you think about what is this effect on cheapening culture, making it almost too easy to create things that appear like art. So we can think about various miracles that Jesus did in the Bible were things like the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Then we can ask ourselves, is that a miracle of efficiency? Is this something that AI can imitate by multiplication of education or multiplication of healthcare or multiplication of art? And we might ask ourselves, what does it mean when this kind of art is being generated by machines, and yet we're here in Rome, which is surrounded by thousands of years of art? There's a different qualitative kind of status of that artwork between the two things. It's a question, I think, whether you should even call AI art. I don't think it's necessarily artwork. It should be called image generation or something like that. All right. So technology has a strong background in Christian tradition, I would say. Jesus, of course, is a carpenter. Jesus tells his disciples to go and do likewise, to imitate his miracles. Wonderful verse in John's Gospel where he says, "Truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact do greater works than these." So an exhortation to do greater works. How do we do great things today? One of the ways that we do those things is through technology. And the example I like to use for that is Norman Borlaug, who was an agronomist back in the 1960s. He developed new ways of producing grain that basically has saved billions of people's lives continuously ever since he developed these technologies. The grain that he produced is now, our world is completely dependent on it. There's no way that we could have 8 billion people in the world. Starvation because of food production is a thing of the past. Of course, there's still starvation in the world, but it's because of lack of access to food, and other places in the world have too much food. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he quoted the Bible many times. He was a devout Lutheran. And so you can think of this as taking the multiplication of food to the next level. We can ask ourselves, might AI also be able to do this? All right, this is in the Piazza Navona, St. Agnes Church. All right, so there are many ways for technology and religion to interact. I'm just going to go through a few of them. So, and coming from it from the side of churches towards the tech industry and from the side of the tech industry toward churches. So religious believers can get involved in the technology industry, obviously, whether it's starting a company or joining a company. People who are already in the technology industry who are religious can form organizations. That's how iTech formed, was by people doing that. Church leaders can get advice from people who are in the tech industry, and so when tech leaders visit the Vatican, that's one way of that communication. There's lots of multi-stakeholder initiatives that put together participation, so for example, AI and Faith is an organization that brings together various faith groups and gets them talking with each other about AI. Churches can host science and religion and technology dialogues, and invite guest speakers, host meetings. More Christian educational emphasis on technology and religion and ethics is another opportunity. Practical education on these sorts of things. In other words, I know a person, he was actually from Italy, but he's now in Silicon Valley, and he was saying churches should teach children how to build drones, for example. So he wanted to have a drone building workshop at a church. And then other church collaborations like the Rome Call. And of course, sometimes funny things can happen. So this is Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, and he came and spoke at the Jesuit Curia in, I guess this was also 2019. And he said, as a joke, I only invest in companies that have one of the 7 deadly sins as part of their appeal. It has to be greed or lust or gluttony or something like that. And you can see some of the people up there look very uncomfortable, but Bishop Paul Tai, who's on the end there, found it to be quite humorous because it was meant as a joke. But also, there's an element of truth there, of course, which is also, this is the danger of the tech industry. All right. The industry is also interested in engaging in religion. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. There are lots of employee resource groups where religious people in a corporation can come together. Also, corporate chaplains, I'll just go to that. There are lots of tech companies that actually rely on corporate chaplains coming in and working with their employees. So this is a very interesting form of engagement. Once again, the Rome Call is on there. Corporate leadership can seek guidance from religious leaders. This happens actually more frequently than you might imagine. The CEO of a company goes and talks to his priest to ask questions. Once again, multi-stakeholder networks and various other initiatives there. So just to wrap up, this is the Pantheon, as you can tell. So the current AI research group is continuing to look at human agency and freedom. Some of the initial things that we talked about are recommendation systems, the idea of nudging, unarticulated want, cognitive warfare, which is a document that NATO produced just a few months ago, which includes psychological warfare, information warfare, and then actual neurological warfare, damaging people's brains, is a thing that people have been talking about. Dish brain and synthetic biological intelligence, the merging of neurons and electronics. There are organizations that are doing this where you lay out an electronic chip and you grow neurons on top of it, and you can train it to play video games. And then brain-computer interfaces where you're actually putting neurons into, or putting electrodes into a person's brain. Okay, I've run out of time, so I'm just gonna say just this one quote from C.S. Lewis. What we call man's power over nature turns out to be man's power, or the power exercised by some men over other men with nature as the instrument. So this idea of we're not gaining power over nature necessarily, but power over each other. All right, and a quote from Deuteronomy. So in conclusion, there are lots of opportunities. There are many things happening. We also shouldn't necessarily wait for these things to happen. We really should be going out there and making them happen. The world is moving too fast for us to wait to respond. We need to take the initiative. And one thing I would say about NHNAI is that it's actually done a fantastic job of taking that initiative, and one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that it has made those steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have 5 minutes question time. Do you have any questions? You can come here.
Perhaps I can speak.
Yeah, if you prefer.
Thank you very much. With a very nice overview of many different topics. Can you say a little bit about the reactions of students when they, and particularly who are involved in technologies? Do they are sensitive to social Christian teaching, for instance, or have you any example about that?
Yes, this is a great question. So I teach in the engineering school at Santa Clara, so I have exactly the experience that you're talking about. My students are, some of them are undergraduate students who went to Santa Clara University, so they have a Jesuit education. They understand the connection of technology and ethics much more deeply than students who went to, say, a secular university or students who came from a different country. So when I'm teaching graduate students, my graduate students are mostly from India now. So when I teach a class of 30 students, 20 of them will be from India. And the students from India have often not been exposed to the idea of ethics and technology at all. That's not something that they've been talking about in their classes. So I think there's a wide diversity of how students engage the material when they see it the first time. And it depends very much on what their background is. If they come from a background where they, as an undergraduate, they experienced connecting ethics and technology, then it seems natural to them. But if they're seeing it for the first time, then it starts putting together ideas that maybe they hadn't thought about before. And one thing I'll say, working with students from India, is that very often they do make connections, but they make connections to their own cultural experience. So they say, oh, this is related to karma, or this is related to other sorts of ideas from Hinduism. So it's interesting to see how the cross-cultural connections operate very differently sometimes.
Just one question, unfortunately. Okay.
Just a question, please. You showed the importance of Christian values to develop artificial intelligence in a better way. And you told us that artificial intelligence was non-neutral as such.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the landscape concerning the values among people developing maybe AI in the US, for example?
Yes.
They don't all share Christian values, so what are their own values from your point of view?
The default of any tech company is to make money. So they are trying to optimize for user engagement, for addictivity, so how addictive is the technology. They want to have as much of your attention as possible if their business model is based on selling advertising, for example. And yet at the same time, there are certain numbers of people within the organization who will recognize that that is not the only thing in the world. So some of them employees will say, recognize that if you optimize for money, you create hell, basically, hell on earth, which is not what we want to live in. And some of the wiser people would recognize that they have to live in the world that their technology is creating. So if you're creating the world, if your technology is changing the world and you have to live in that world, there is also the incentive to make the world actually better and not worse. But not every leader and not every employee at a technology company recognizes that. So there's currently a struggle, I would say, within many technology companies. The older technology companies, I think, understand it a little bit better because they've grown up a little bit, right? They've gained experience over life. The life cycle of an organization is kind of like a human being in some ways. And so the younger technology companies tend to be very aggressive and not think long term and be very focused on making money.
Okay, unfortunately we have a very strict schedule, so we have to move forward. Thank you so much, Brian, for this beautiful contribution. Okay, we have to move forward to the next speech.
Okay, well, I don't know whether it is already shared in the, for those online.
So, okay, thank you so much. I introduce, sorry for the pronunciation, Onyeukaziri, Justin-Nnaemeka.
Good enough, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the talk is about artificial intelligence and the question on ethico-moral algorithmic representation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. So what I decided to do is to read a summary of my latest research on this part of AI. And then if I have time left, then I can emphasize some other points. So I think we can also follow. The central problematic of this research presentation is, can the concept of moral good, el ipso, in itself, be both algorithmic and computational? So that is just the question I'm reflecting on in this research. And it links to all what we have been saying, the possibility of ethics in AI, ethical AI, or AI ethics, morality, and all those things. As the science and design of artificial intelligence systems advance, the philosophy of AI and cognition in general becomes more cogent. This presentation is an interrogation within the scope of the philosophy of AI and the science of cognition in general. It considers the question of moral and ethical knowledge, its representation, and processing or manipulation in cognitive systems, natural or artificial. Natural in the sense that we humans and other animals, like what Churchland mentioned yesterday, the possibility of knowledge representation, whether it is moral knowledge or epistemic knowledge or logical knowledge, and its manipulation. Hence, at the heart of the problem in this discourse are the following questions. How is moral knowledge represented in humans? That is a bit connection between the question I was trying to ask yesterday. How, because do we really know how we know a good action and an evil action? Can moral knowledge be represented in AI systems? In other words, the question is whether or not the automation of moral and ethical knowledge is possible. This is my name. So in a paper published last year, because after publishing this paper, I kept reflecting, and that was what led me to the this present research paper. So in this paper, titled Action and Agency, is online, can be downloaded. Action and Agency in Artificial Intelligence, a philosophical critique. In this paper interrogates the question of the notions of action and agency in AI systems. And in this paper, I contend that AI systems do not and cannot possess free agency and autonomy. Thus, they cannot be morally and ethically responsible. So that was my basic claim in this paper. Free agency and autonomy. AI has agency, but whether or not they have free agency and autonomy. There is an epistemic and cognitive presupposition in this particular paper. And that is, this epistemic and cognitive presupposition is that there is a clear, I presuppose that even we humans, we know clearly how we have moral representation and computation. So there's that presupposition that, so as I was reflecting, I realized that this is a presupposition. I needed to ask first the question, how do we humans, we know that we humans make moral decisions, we are moral persons, we take moral responsibility, but how do our mind or brain do it? You know? So, and that is how Patricia Churchland's presentation, keynote yesterday, is it possible through neuroscience for us to understand how our brain, you know, represents moral knowledge and make moral judgments, and then how, is it possible the brain or the mind, how we take moral actions? Is there something that neuroscience can tell us about that? If it is possible, then that can be replicated in artificial intelligence system. So this epistemic and cognitive presupposition is that there is a clear and certain knowledge of how moral ethical knowledge is known, represented, and processed in human systems. Based on this presupposition, the aforementioned paper focuses on the phenomena of free agency and autonomy in humans in relation to the question of moral and ethical responsibility in AI systems. This is to say that the problematic interrogated therein is on the moral, ethical, and even legal consequences of actions of AI systems in human society. So that was the focus of that last paper. In this respect, moral knowledge and moral judgments are considered exclusive capabilities in human nature and are manifested in the lived experiences of every human person. So that was the question I asked yesterday was linked to this particular reference here. However, one of the implications of the rational capacity, which implies intelligence, is moral knowledge. So, is rational activities in accordance with so Aristotle will say. One of the consequences of human intelligence is the ability to know moral good and bad, which is complemented by the ability to execute moral and ethical actions. As cognitive research on non-human intelligence progresses, one of the evolutionary distinctions of humans is the intelligence of moral and ethical knowledge, formulations, and judgment. Only the human race has been able to establish moral institutions and enact ethical codes. So, while the aforementioned paper deals with the question of moral volition, this particular research paper, deals with what precedes moral volition, which is the question of moral intelligence, the representation and formulation of moral knowledge. Thus, this presentation is a discourse on the question of ethical and moral algorithmic representation in artificial intelligence systems. It examines the possibility of logical formalization of ethical and moral representation and judgment in AI systems in such a way that AI systems could create ethical and or moral behaviors or actions. So can we formalize moral knowledge using, for example, mathematical logic, first predicate logic, and others to formalize moral knowledge and then do some kind of proof analysis? Hence, it raises questions that border on moral metaphysics and ethical epistemology, such as free agency and ethical determinism on one hand, and moral apprehension and ethical cognition on the other hand. Hence, like every study in the philosophy of artificial intelligence, the investigation of these problematics in AI systems would lead to a deeper critical and analytical reflection on human ethical and moral representations, conceptualizations, judgments, and behaviors or actions. This presentation argues that considering the metaphysical nature of free agency in the intrinsic relations between reason and desire in moral cognitive operation, that dialectic between reason and desire that is necessary and sufficient for moral action. So it's not enough to know moral good, but to know moral good is not enough. It doesn't make you a moral system. You must act morally, either for good or for evil, before you could be said to be a moral system. The question of ethical and moral algorithmic representation in AI systems is a possibility that can be automatized in AI systems. I think, can we represent the knowledge? I think it is possible. I think it's possible. But the possibility of it, does it ipso facto make AI system moral being? My claim is no. I expand both the metaphysics and epistemology of moral actions in Plato's dialogue. I think that is interesting, Eutropho. The question of piety, Socrates met Eutropho, and the question of piety. I think I tried to do write some kind of algorithm on the dialogue between Socrates and Eutropho on the question of piety. And maybe in future, to see the possibility of whether one can run that to see the possibility of that representation. Then Aristotle's ethics in order to grasp the quiddity of moral good and the nature of the human person as an ethical being. Hence, the following critical question is interrogated: how is the knowledge of moral action represented? And how are moral judgment and decisions made in the human person? The first question would be, does something happen to the brain when we make moral decisions and judgments? Can we know it? Can we know what happens? If we can, what is it? Is knowing what happens to the human brain sufficient for understanding the representation, judgment, and decision of moral and ethical actions in the human person? In other words, is moral knowledge or ethics based on neuroscience? So these are very important fundamental questions around this. Furthermore, the analysis of the conceptualization of AI, which mainly focus on the views of Newell and Herbert Simon, is advanced in examining the question of ethico-moral representation AI. According to them, since ability to solve problems is generally taken as a prime indicator that a system has intelligence, it is natural that much of the history of artificial intelligence is taken up with the attempt to build and understand problem-solving systems. Critical in this statement are the notions of intelligence and problem-solving systems. One kind of problem-solving, very interesting, yesterday, Churchland mentioned problem-solving as one of the necessary factors for creating of norms in social systems. One kind of problem-solving demonstration that hitherto has been exclusively attributed to the human person is the knowing, processing, and solving of moral problems. The capability of moral apprehension, discernment, and judgment, thus, has been marked as one of the main specific differences in human intelligence. As the design and development of AI systems advances, the question that is central to this paper is, can moral apprehension, discernment, and judgment be automated? Simply put, this paper examines the question, what constitutes moral intelligence, and how does moral intelligence operate? Can the operation of moral intelligence coexist in both human intelligence systems and AI systems? Thus, this question challenged the claim for the specificity of the ethico-moral representation and knowledge in the human person. Or is it the case that the representation of ethico-moral actions is of the kind that cannot be automated or computationalized? Thus, it is important to examine the representation of knowledge in general and the automatization and computationalization of knowledge of moral actions. Hence, the questions are, is it only human system that can be morally and ethically coded by external agents? Can non-human biological systems be morally and ethically coded? Can non-biological, that is, artificial systems, be morally and ethically coded? In other words, can there be moral and ethical automation? The answer to these questions following the discourse above depends on two factors. The first concerns the nature of the human person, and the second concerns the nature of symbolic representation, or the question of representationalism in AI and in cognitive science in general. So basically that is summing up my paper. So I wish to thank the Cardinal Upins Foundation in my university for sponsoring my participation in this conference. Thank you very much. So we have more time for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, any question?
Thank you very much for your speech. I agree with you the necessity to change from artificial intelligence to system. But you spoke about the metaphysical foundation of human action. But my question, I don't understand how do you mean about this? When you speak about metaphysics, what do you mean? You are starting from Aristotelic point of view or a phenomenological point of view? How we can give a metaphysical foundation of human action in relation with AI? So I ask you if you can focus about this point.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I mean, there's no movement from artificial intelligence to system. Artificial intelligence is a system. So it's the decision between natural system on natural intelligence system. A good example is you and me. We are natural intelligence system, and artificial intelligence system, non-natural intelligence system. So that's just to clarify that first point. The second point, when we say metaphysical, whether is to look at the quiddity let me use the Latin word, quiddity. What makes a thing, you know? Whether you are using the classical metaphysics or contemporary metaphysics, it is like yesterday they talked about the a priority of the thing, you know? So to look at is there any self-evident axiom from an axiom that you can demonstrate other, you know, make other claims? So what makes the thing? For example, what makes morality? So when you're asking that kind of question, you are now on the realm of metaphysics. So you want to, first of all, to the best as the human intelligence can push you, to know what makes morality moral, what makes the good action a good action. Then when you come to some kind of effort to have some kind of self-evident principle, then you can now demonstrate. That is simply what metaphysics, whether it is in the classical or in the medieval or today, is to come from that level of there is this a priori, there's this apprehension that is given to us, and which Kant talked about, you know, transcendental perception. So there's something that is, if you like, modus ponens, and then from there, we can now make other claims. And so there's that thing which is logically or conceptually founded by which we can now deduce other claims. In that sense, then there is metaphysics. It's different from neuroscience. Neuroscience is to look at the brain, is to look at the neuron systems and to see whether there are some experimentally scientific, some kind of observation happening in the human brain or neurosystem generally, by which now we can now make certain observatory claims. So just that's, I don't know whether I answered the question. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other question?
No, well, okay. Thanks for that from the standpoint of science. Just two things from what you have said, which I think is helpful to my reflection, is first of all, that to now is a given. It's easy to understand. One, don't need to be a neuroscientist to know that something happens in my brain whenever I make moral decisions. Something happens, okay. Something happens in the brain because, as I say, it has to do with knowledge representation. So brain is involved. A dead person does not make moral decisions. So there's a living person when you're not brain dead. So that means brain is involved. But now, having known what happens in the brain, okay, my point is that when we know what happens in the brain, perhaps we can now, in artificial systems, artificial intelligence systems, artificial systems, if we know what happens, if we know the science, we can perhaps create artificial models of them. That's my point. But however, creating artificial models of what happens in our brain, does it now make what we have created now a moral system? And that brings back to what we have. That's exactly what I'm trying to, the point I'm making. That's if we understand how the brain works in respect to moral knowledge, we can do that. Because we understand how language works, because we understand how logic works, that is why we have large language models. That is why we have done that. So the more we understand how moral things work with respect to our brain, then we can reproduce, we can simulate, we can get the models, artificial models of them. But I have created this artificial model who has moral representation, but does it make it a moral system? And I said something is missing, because a moral system, just as you said, there's reason and desire. And in desire, we have pain and pleasure. So I know that this action is not good, but at that point in time, my desire wants me to do it. So there's always that dialectics between rationality and desire, which you use the word emotion, pleasure, and pain. So to create a moral system, there must be that ability for both rationality and the, if you like, irrational part, which is the desire. There must be that, then you may moral, because what makes you, nobody claps for you if you are forced to do something. You don't have your free agency. So that free agency, you know this is good or not good, but you decide to do it or decide not to do it, then you are not a moral system. So that is, well, thanks for that interjection from the science, neuroscience perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
So we move forward to the next speaker, Alejandra Marinovic Guijón, excuse me for the pronunciation, from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. The talk is about universities and the digital divide, the capabilities approach from a Latin American perspective.
Thank you. How do we reach the email?
Did you send?
Yeah, I sent it to Stefanos. That. Exactly. Perhaps here.
This one?
This one. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present my work here. I'm very happy to make this very small contribution. I must clarify that I am an economist trying to work in ethics, so please bear with me with the figures and some of the thoughts that I will present. This study regards the situation of Latin America and the digital divide. I will try to read as much as possible to stay in time. Latin America suffers from strong inequalities in diverse dimensions, including income, education, race, and gender, which are entangled in multidimensional ways of poverty and exclusion. Universities can play a significant role in equalizing opportunities and improving the quality of life in the region. While the advance of technology offers numerous benefits, at the same time, it is fostering at an accelerating speed a digital divide. Such a process has exacerbated socioeconomic differences, which were particularly deepened during the pandemic when education had to happen through digital means. There's an important idea that we're talking here about AI and neuroscience, but things are happening so fast that we forget the other end of the digital transformation. So I'm trying to put some light into that as well. Sen and Nussbaum's capabilities approach to human development offers a useful normative framework to consider such gaps and derive guidelines for universities. So we will not be able to eliminate the gaps, but how hard should we fight them? And for this, we need normative elements. We argue that the digital divide generates stronger social and ethical demands for universities at all levels of their activities, education, research, and service to the community, just a very simplification of the work of the universities. So at all levels of their activities and at all levels of the digital divide, which I will explain, access, skills and usage and outcomes. At the same time, maintaining the focus of universities on the human person and not on technology as an end appears as a significant challenge for universities in the digital era. Let me give you some context for Latin America. The digital age finds Latin America in an educational crisis. Amidst what the United Nations has called a difficult gridlock. Latin America and the Caribbean is the most unequal region of the world in terms of income. It is the region that experienced the sharpest drop in the Human Development Index in 2020 and 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic. The region is also experiencing the most rapid rise in political polarization in the world, and according to Latinobarómetro, trust in institutions has decreased significantly to close to 20%, with a similar trend in terms of generalized trust, all of which decrease the country's ability to take collective action for the common good. Just as a reference, the United States has around 50% of generalized trust, more or less, and Scandinavian countries have 60, 70%. So 20% of generalized trust is really low. In this preoccupant scenario, 61% of people in Latin America indicate to have high or very high confidence in universities, adding to their already high social responsibility. Regarding multidimensional inequality and the normative elements, let me mention that inequalities are a complex phenomenon present in very diverse dimensions of people's lives. They are observed at numerous and intertwined levels, for example, difference between the income of developed and developing countries, as well as among people's ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, spatial location, and class, just to mention a few, which manifest within regions, societies, communities, and households. Gaps in newer areas are emerging, including access to and use of information and communication technologies, ICTs. The gaps tend to exacerbate each other for the poorest. This has already been studied. To assess which, why, and to what degree inequalities are not desirable, we need a normative framework that incorporates the previous complexity. We propose to state our discussion from the perspective of the capabilities approach for human development. This approach stems from the centrality of human dignity and offers a broad normative framework to conceptualize and evaluate individual well-being and social arrangements. Even if it's not a complete theory of justice, it does face questions of the balance between freedoms and equality. In the capabilities approach, Sen argues that human development should aim at increasing freedoms so that all human beings can pursue choices that they value. These freedoms have two fundamental aspects: freedom of personal well-being, constituted by functionings and capabilities, and freedom of agency, represented by the person's voice and autonomy. Functionings refer to the various things a person might value being and doing, such as being happy, adequately nourished, and in good health, as well as having self-respect and taking part in the life of the community. Capabilities are the various sets of functionings, beings and doings, that a person can achieve. The evaluation of equality must consider both the freedom to choose as much as the observed available choices that the person has. Finally, agency is related to what a person is free to do and achieve in pursuit of whatever goals or values he or she regards as relevant. Nussbaum and Sen highlight that the word capabilities is used in the plural in this approach because the most important elements of quality of life are multiple and distinct: health, physical integrity, education, and they are irreducible. Education plays a central role in the capabilities approach as it is related to all of them: freedoms, functionalities, capabilities, and agency. The capabilities approach considers the possibility of differences among individuals, given that what they value can vary, as well as their context. However, it also provides criteria to evaluate when such differences constitute undesirable inequalities. Hence, the capabilities approach suggests that under the extensive conditions of poverty, extreme economic inequality, exclusion, discrimination, and conflicts, such as in Latin America, the educational system, including universities, ought to contribute toward equality and opportunities and freedom of agency. This approach also provides a useful framework for analyzing possible actions in the presence of diverse inequalities, particularly the digital divide, since it tackled the question, equality of what? It might be impossible to eliminate the digital divide, or even not desirable, given possible differences in individual choices and values. But the previous normative elements provide a basis to argue that it should be reduced when it negatively affects the freedom's functioning capabilities and/or agencies. Regarding the digital divide, this is an evolving concept. The most common definition indicated at the beginning of this work is the following: a division between people who have access and use of digital media and those who do not. That's the most simple definition. However, it gets more complicated, and with good reason. Initially, the focus was access, but further along, the quality of use has become increasingly more important. The OECD definition adds relevant aspects. It refers to the gap between individuals, households, businesses, geographic areas at different socioeconomic levels, with regard both to their opportunities to access information and communication technologies and to the use of the internet for a wide variety of activities. So there's a social dimension to the digital divide as well. Not that it refers only to among individuals, but it also considers collective differences. So why is the digital divide so important? The elements laid out in the previous evolving definitions suggest that the digital divide is different from the impact of other technological changes. This author argues that it differs because its speed and vast effects among countries is faster than before, much faster than before. It touches every imaginable part of society and its activities, and also because its relevance in whether individuals are included or excluded from society in numerous domains, such as work, education, the market, community, citizenship, politics, and culture. In this sense, being on the wrong side of the digital divide constitutes a major problem for individuals and communities. The literature defines three levels of the digital divide. The first one focuses on access. The second emphasizes the quality of access. And level 3 focuses on the outcomes. This level, the third one, approaches the digital divide as a concept related to inequality effects. At this level, the divide refers to the possibilities of exclusion of multidimensional benefits. So here we see a very basic indicator, individuals using the internet, and as you can see, it is growing, but it's still, the gaps are not being closed. Access is still a great challenge. Internet access in Latin America has grown steadily, but it is significantly below the developed countries. It's widely different across regions, and for example, there's a lot of heterogeneity across countries. For instance, in 2021, Uruguay and Chile exhibit 90% of the population using the internet, while Guatemala and Honduras are closer to 50%. And it is severely segregated by income. I will step this and show you the figures. Then you see that the richest people are the highest bar, and the poorest quintile is very, very low. So you have countries, for example, in Uruguay, where the richer quintile has double the access to internet than poorer people. Other dimensions of the digital divide include, for example, age. In 2018, 1/3 of the regional population had no or limited access to the internet due to their economic situation. 33% of urban households were not connected, while in rural areas it is 77%. Regarding age differences, 42% of the population under 25 years of age and 54% of the population over 66 years of age were not connected. These figures suggest that the problem of basic access to ICTs in Latin America is far from being solved. This is an indicator that I calculated in this study, which graphs the gap among the 4 Latin American countries that are in the OECD, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Mexico, in comparison to the top four top performers in this indicator regarding, in this case, quality, because it has to do with broadband subscription, mobile broadband, and then the other one comparable to the previous ones, people that use the internet. And as you can see, in 2022, broadband the subscriptions, this one here, per 100 inhabitants in the 4 Latin American universities is less than half of that of the top 4 OECD performers. And data usage in gigabytes is 1/3 of it. So education in Latin America is unequal and lagging. Just one figure, 4 in 5 6th graders in Latin America and the Caribbean lack basic reading comprehension proficiency. And access to tertiary education has been growing steadily, but is far from the opportunity of more developed countries. You can see here the gaps that are formed in enrollment in tertiary education, and then you see here the difference between more developed countries and Latin America. So for this study, I built a 3x3 matrix of recommendations from the viewpoint of the capabilities approach, and having identified 3 broad university tasks, so education, research, and knowledge transmission, and the 3 levels I just mentioned of the digital divide, so access, skills and usage, so quality, and outcomes, we organize our reflections for the regional context according to the dimensions. So we take the context, the definitions of the divide, and the university tasks. And I just pick a few examples because perhaps we think that this is very obvious, but when we see it in the context and the figures, it becomes very relevant. And it gives a sense of what universities ought to be doing according to this normative approach. So, for example, in education and access, we think that English and providing hardware and software are really relevant. Thank you. Really relevant. So it appears as obvious, but in Latin America, we speak Spanish or Portuguese. If everything is in English, it's very difficult to use it more deeply. So regarding the other area, research and the quality of use, so another couple of concepts, academic cooperation with developed countries to mitigate the technological gap appears as a somewhat obvious recommendation, but it gathers a lot of purpose and sense because it becomes one of the most important tasks of inclusion that can be done through universities. And regarding the last task, service to community and outcomes of ICTs, it is important that universities contribute to the development of public policies regarding the digital revolution, innovation, rules, ethical aspects, for example, what we're doing here. This is essential. And this is only one of the recommendations that you will find in this study. And then again, we have to move to another dimension that has to do with focusing on the human person. In front of the accelerated technological change, the sense of purpose of knowledge and human flourishing in a sustainable world must act as an indispensable moral compass for the work of universities. This is John Paul II. Universities constitute principal spaces of scientific research for the progress of knowledge and society. They play a decisive role in economic and social and cultural development, especially in a time with fast, constant, and far-reaching changes in science and technology, and this is Francisco. The latter reaches highlighted importance given that the digital era has come in the context of the technocratic paradigm, a one-dimensional paradigm where what is technologically feasible becomes good, and power lies in those who own technology, also Francisco. Under this perspective, the technocratic paradigm, technology becomes not only a means, an instrument, but a way of apprehending things, and therefore, knowledge becomes technical feasibility. In addition, when the relationship with nature is mediated by technology under this paradigm, a technological imperative follows, an infinite desire for more, curtailing human freedom, which we have heard here in various talks. The risk of losing the sense of universities by abandoning the human person as a center in the face of vertiginous technological changes would imply continually changing the points of reference for education. It will curtail the capacity of universities to reflect on their actions toward the good and hinder university ethical discernment. The loss of focus on the human person implies as well losing the capacity to judge and react to the digital divide. Considering technology as a solution to every problem and ignoring the relational dimension of human interactions renders society less able to react against injustice. This is Francisco. In addition, following Newman's reasonings, the technocratic approach can also hinder teaching and learning by paring down a culture of dialogue and debate, which represents a basic functionality of education. There's a couple. Okay. Falling into the technocratic paradigm should also be avoided by universities by fostering all forms of knowledge from a universal stance to contribute not only to the students' professional and personal lives, but also toward better citizenship and more excellent societies. If universities lose sight of what matters for human flourishment, they will be unable to perceive and evaluate the effects of growing digital divides, which in turn would damage progressively development opportunities of individuals and societies. So I leave here the conclusions for you to read. I already mentioned them, and we can go to the questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So we can start the discussion. Any questions? So maybe I can ask a question. Could you clarify just a point of your speech? What is the impact of digital divide on the question of citizenship? And do you see differences between different countries in South America? Can you say something more about this?
Sure. Well, what we see is that political participation, for example, is highly concentrated in people with higher income. That's one aspect. So if you also pair that with the fact that richer people have more access to university, and that evolves like a virtuous cycle. You have more education, you have more access to technology, so you, for example, can defend better your rights. You can communicate your needs and your positions, your opinions, and you can also use all the social media in order to gather support and to propose, for example, political projects. But if you go the other way, it becomes very, very difficult and in a vicious cycle. And what you see is that political participation is also, in studies that we have done in Latin America, is related to trust. So countries that have higher social capital and higher trust have a lot more participation of all groups in society. What you see in Latin America with the worst inequality scenario of the world is that countries that have much lower income, such as Bolivia, for example, or Nicaragua, Honduras, are more in the vicious part of the cycle. And then you see that some particular groups, especially those more educated and with higher income in countries like Chile, Uruguay, Argentina, and Mexico, have much higher participation. So income plays a substantial role, and it's aggravated, exacerbated by the digital divide. Does that answer your question?
Yes, to some extent. I had just a small follow-up. Do you think that, but it's a big question, do you think that education is maybe the only condition in order to build trust in these technologies?
Not at all. Not at all. Education is one of the sources.
Okay.
Is one of the sources. But there are many approaches to trust.
Okay.
For example, there's the institutional approach. So the quality of institutions also matter for trust. You can have rational trust if the institutions work, because you're somewhat protected. But you can also have moral trust towards others if the institutions are not working or even in parallel. So the fact that you can educate for trust, and education is highly related to the quality of institutions, and transaction costs, if you want, more from the economic side, you will find that all of these are related, and I would recommend to use all sources of trust to build trust in order to improve the quality of the relations that we have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this presentation. But I would like to hear from you whether there is any initiative from the Latin American governments in making sure that this digital divide is somehow minimized, in the sense that is there a political will from the political leaders to make sure that that gap does not actually continue to be as presented here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think that you will find a lot of a very strong diversity of policies depending on the countries, the size of the governments, and the resources that they have for this. But in my opinion, what you see is that most of the policies are focused on access for people. When you have half of the population not connected to internet, that becomes the most important issue. But I think you cannot forget that also, in my opinion, the strongest impact has to do with the outcomes of this gap, which is moving very, very fast. So if we are not aware, and I believe it is so, we are not aware in Latin America how pervasive this gap is and how fast it acts, policy actions is lagging, and it's severely lagging. You will see that most is focused on access, which is our work as universities to move forward and to put other accents before it's too late. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contribution. So let's move forward the next speaker. Okay, let me introduce the next speaker, David Doat, from the Catholic University of Lille. David will talk about decoding differences, epistemic and ethical perspectives on human and AI decision-making. Thank you so much, David, for being here.
Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and to share my reflection, my current reflection, which is an open and not ended reflection. So the title of my presentation is Decoding Differences, like you told, epistemic and ethical perspectives on human and AI decision-making. So it has become a commonplace that artificial intelligence plays an increasingly social role in human domains such as healthcare, decision, education, justice, and security, raising significant ethical and societal questions about decision-making. In healthcare, the challenge is to balance the efficiency of AI's algorithms with the nuanced expertise of human practitioners, particularly when decisions have life-altering consequences. AI processes vast medical data swiftly, prompting ethical concerns about the autonomy these systems should have in critical decision-making. Within education, we have just talked about it, apprehensions arise about the potential loss of the human touch in teaching through AI-driven personalized learning. Human educators extend beyond knowledge transfer, offering empathetic understanding and essential emotional connection for holistic learning. Striking the right equilibrium between AI efficiency and human mentorship remains paramount. In the realm of justice and security, AI applications pose intricate ethical challenges, decision-making on criminal sentencing, threat assessments, and surveillance requires subtle moral considerations that seems to go beyond algorithmic calculations. The fundamental question is whether AI can truly grasp the complexity of human behavior and context. In a recent study by Gandal et al., the authors expressed great enthusiasm about the recent advances in an AI named Scotus AI, which combines deep learning techniques, a sentiment analysis tool, the linguistic inquiry and word count, LIWC, and a psycholinguistic model of language. This AI enables a deep analysis of the linguistic markers of emotions associated with the language used in briefs and oral arguments before the United States Supreme Court. Among the myriad theories concerning the processes underpinning judgments, two typically dominate academic discourse: institutionalism and psychoanalytic functionalism. While not mutually exclusive, these models represent distinct approaches. The former theory reaffirms a traditional legal framework that focuses on predicting court behavior through a contextual analysis of legal precedents, rules, and substantive arguments. The latter model posits that human behavior can be represented by a series of advanced mathematical functions, predictable based on certain sets of environmental externalities and psychological cues. In other words, according to the psychoanalytic functionalist view, the merit of reasoning is predominantly a function of internalized and subconscious drives, which can be formalized within a statistical and probabilistic framework, which legal rules or tests acting as pretext for a predetermined preferred outcome. The Scotus AI tool is rooted in this psychoanalytic functionalist school of thought. According to the authors, it has successfully identified psycholinguistic patterns, I mean certain relationships between affects and linguistic forms that are not really available even to experienced scholars, substantially enhancing the AI predictive capacity regarding Supreme Court decisions. Scotus AI identifies linguistic constructions and the associated emotions, allowing it to predict the court's ensuing decisions. In their study, the authors demonstrate retrospectively that their AI model's ability to predict the outcomes of a number of cases reviewed by the Supreme Court exceeds 80%, compared to 65 to 75% for other prediction models. The authors also analyze ongoing cases and predict outcomes using Scotus AI, writing, I quote them, that some of which have already come true at both the time of writing of this paper and its corresponding peer review, which demonstrate the practical utility to our model. The fundamental presupposition of psychoanalytic functionalism, but also to the institutionalist tradition in a different way, is that a judicial decision is the result of a sequence whose predetermined path dictates the outcome, whether that outcome rests on a system of established norms and the weighting of arguments or on a dynamic of determined effects, where words carry an emotional charge that ultimately produces predictable results, provided that we approach a formalizable understanding of the system that generates them. The authors conclude that Scotus AI, I quote them, can be a useful tool in identifying probable outcomes. However, they acknowledge that the use of such a tool in the exercise of justice could have a retroactive effect on judicial behavior, which is difficult to predict and raises many other ethical questions, which are not limited to the problem of explainability and accountability. More broadly, this case of AI usage in the judicial context raises not only ethical but also epistemic questions, which are also encountered in the fields of health and education about the difference between human decision-making and machine decision-making. More broadly, it raises the question of to what extent and under what circumstances human decision-making is not only epistemically inevitable but also ethically essential. The idea that machines might one day replace judges in rendering judgments or predicting any human decision assumes that human and artificial decision-making processes are interchangeable and that an artificial entity could one day replace the human actor on the grounds of greater automaticity, information analysis capability, impartiality, and fairness in case handling, which assumes the ability to apply general rules to particular cases and draw analogies between different cases. In opposition to this thesis, I would like to emphasize how human decision-making differs from what is often mistakenly referred to through anthropomorphic misuse as machine decision-making. I propose to explore this question, first highlighting differences between artificial and human agency, then focusing on decision-making and embodied cognition. I will finally touch on the European AI regulation, the AI Act. While it's a significant stride for trusted AI development, it also raises several issues, two of which I will mention in connection with our analysis. So, broadly defined, AI agency is the ability of an intelligent agent to perceive its environment, act autonomously or semi-autonomously, to achieve goals and possibly improve its utility function through learning or knowledge acquisition. In decision theory and AI agency, the utility function is a mathematical tool for AI systems that guides algorithmic selection processes. It influences subsequent actions by evaluating potential outcomes and choosing the best option according to their programming and objectives. The utility function is essential for directing AI actions and ensuring the system works as intended. Another aspect of AI agency is its location in a well-defined ontological realm from a cosmological perspective. It operates by a computational and algorithmic principles and acts on encrypted data in a digital space that is localized part of the physical world. However, this realm lacks the cosmological and biological features that define human agency and separate it from machine agency. Qualities such as embodied cognition, consciousness, understanding, emotions, freedom, empathy, joint attention, and the ability to adjust goals based on complex factors beyond a formal rational choice theory, these aspects of human agency are hard to fully explain or replicate within the cosmological space of artificial intelligence. The difference in their locations highlights the need for a distinction between human and artificial agency. Many physical events can be simulated in a digital realm with math and algorithms, allowing for accurate forecasts, recommendations, or actions. However, some events are hard to quantify and may elude algorithmic processing if they are not fully calculable. Tasks like managing indoor temperature or ensuring air passenger safety can be efficiently delegated to simple or complex intelligent agents, such as thermostats or onboard computers. But entrusting certain kind of human actions and cognitive functions to artificial agents faces limits of relevance. Human-machine collaboration in sectors such as health, education, and justice is far more appropriate than replacing or substituting humans with machines, particularly where cooperation, accountability chains, and theory of mind are essential. By theory of mind, I mean the ability to impute mental states to oneself and others, according to Primark and Woodruff. I would like to specifically highlight two properties of human agency that morally and epistemologically distinguish it from artificial agency in these fields and deem it necessary: decision-making and embodied cognition. In computer language, decision means the artificial system's preference for one action over another based on some calculation within the initial conditions of human-programmed rules. However, from an anthropological and semantic perspective, decision does not match the idea of a continuous process that produces inductions or inferences from a formal system applied to data. Etymologically, language often reveals deep meanings from human experience. The verb to decide comes from the Latin decidere, meaning to cut, to detach, to slice. This Latin verb has the prefix di, indicating negation, privation, or separation, and the verb caedere, meaning to cut, slaughter, kill, chop. It is not trivial to note that etymologically, to decide implies two acts of negation, as this corresponds to the human experience of decision. Deciding presupposes, at the human level, an act that depends on the real possibility of breaking with the causal closure of a formalism, whatever it may be, either to resume it later, having decided to follow its logical propositions, or to create or commit to new rules and directions. From this point of view, an AI system never decides on its own, because a decision is not at the same level as a sequence of operations governed by a system of rules, whether logical, legal, or ethical. Deciding is an act that differs from other processes that may simulate a decision, prepare it, predict it, or inform it up to a certain point, whether we call it them computation, deliberation, or reasoning, but which are separate from the act of decision-making itself. Making AI morally or legally accountable for decisions is thus a mistake. Yet it is a frequent anthropomorphic fantasy in many discourses on AI. Similarly, a human decision, such as that of a judge ruling on a case, can never be entirely predictable, even though there are numerous conditioning factors that allow for a certain degree of predictability. There will always remain an element of uncertainty tied to the unique nature of human decision-making. A second aspect of human agency is participating in a meaningful world, a meaning inaccessible to a formal system confined to an algorithmic universe. A philosophical tradition from Jacob von Uexküll and Erwin Strauss to Hans Jonas and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and the modern enaction or 4E theories, argue that meaning does not stem from manipulating symbols, numbers, or language, nor from a mind made of neural networks. It emerges from the complex dynamic relations between a physical body and its environment that generate mind, meaning, and speech. In this view, meaning is not derived from language, which is only one mode of its expression. Instead, it originates from a profoundly embodied cognition where cognitive acts and mental, emotional, individual, social, cultural, and moral properties are inseparably linked to the congenital and diverse relationships which dynamically co-constitute individuals and their contexts of coexistence. Within this perspective, semantics originates from a set of complex multi-level transactions between a speaking body and a context where speech finds meaning. Accordingly, AIs and robots lack the semantic and pragmatic capabilities that presuppose embodied cognition. I mean a certain mode of participation of living beings in the world. It would only be through a biomimetic condition of profound and radical compenetration between a machine and its surroundings, akin to the continuous metabolic exchanges between living beings and their environments, that an AI or a robot could perhaps grasp meaning. I don't know, perhaps. Embodied cognition and human decision-making are two aspects that define human agentivity. Along with other specific properties of human agentivities, they help highlight why many situations need control over artificial agents that can order actions or operations more or less autonomously. Just as no ethical theory can solve a real-life problem only by applying its norms or rules, neither can any computational AI model easily replace the individual or collective deliberation and responsibility-taking in social situations where disagreement on values and conflicts of interpretation may arise. This for at least three reasons. First, because the full range of capacities required for decision-making that tends to be rational, which is very different from impulsive volition, does not solely fall within the realm of computability. Second, because in decision-making, the path to the decision often matters much, or just as much, if not more, than the decision itself. Third, because deliberation and decision-making always occur within an evolving and unique context of action, composed of a diversity of interwoven physical and sociocultural phenomena, informed by physical, historical, and social constraints, laws, rules, values, customs, reasons, and emotions. Formal decision support tools can help, but they require human agents who can understand, adjust, adapt, validate, and monitor them, and who can be accountable, explain, and justify their decisions. The same need for supervision and adjustment to context is necessary for predictive AIs in the realm of judicial decision-making. Returning back to the case of Scotus AI mentioned earlier, its designers admit that the tool is only effective when applied to a specific context, that of the Supreme Court briefs and arguments, and that its relevance depends on a set of elements, including some cultural, social, and political stability, data updates, and the relevance of training data, which implicitly require significant human oversight and supervision. They also recognize that sentiment analyzers struggle to parse language based on context. For example, they are currently unable to distinguish sarcastic statements from similar genuine ones. Likewise, they cannot detect certain coded contexts, such as when advocates cite a case with strong moral or political connotations. To conclude, I would like to briefly comment on the European regulatory project for trustworthy AI, the AI Act. The AI Act aims to ensure strong human control and the preservation of important deliberative and decision-making processes for a type of AI called high-risk AI. These are AI systems with potential adverse impacts on health, safety, environment, and fundamental rights. Excluding unacceptable AIs, the AI Act mandates continuous human control through assessment, pre, post, and during operations, external audits, transparency, human oversight obligations, and avenues for citizens to appeal or demand explanations if fundamental rights are at risk. Besides high-risk AI systems, the AI Act states that other AI will pose minor risks and will be subject to less strict monitoring and control rules, limited to minimal risk AI. This category includes, for example, AI systems that can calculate the optimal trajectory of a satellite, the smart piloting of a drone tracking a bird species, the execution of routine banking or administrative operation, and so on. The intelligent management of recommendation algorithms, the development of conversational agents, or AI for video games, and so on. But also LLM models, even if some of their uses may be classified as high-risk AI. However, the distinction between high-risk and non-high-risk AI sparks debate due to potential flaws and industry lobbying influence on categorization. And this has clearly played and had an impact on some decisions regarding the writing of the AI Act. Secondly, the AI Act definition of an artificial intelligence system raises false problems and unnecessary social misunderstandings, defining AI as follows. An AI system is a machine-based system that infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. The definition implies that decisions can be one of the effects of algorithmic processes, yet artificial intelligence does not make decisions, nor does it understand the reasons behind its operations. It cannot be held responsible for preferences, selections, or actions based on human programming constraints. The AI Act mentions sharing human responsibility in case of injury, but could benefit from replacing decision with terms like intervention, orientation, or command of operations in its definition. That's the suggestions I make. Finally, the AI Act only very superficially addresses the sectoral issues and problems raised at the beginning of our intervention in the areas of health, education, justice, and security. The cognitively embodied human arts of carefulness, observation, evaluation, case history, and decision-making remain essential to shape the basis of a trustworthy use of AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for this talk. So let's open the question time. You have any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a bit confused whether you are dealing with decision in general or you are narrowing it to judicial decisions. So, because if it is this decision making in general, because if he's making a decision, I want him to be very much reasonable, rational, and logical in his decisions. So I expect humans to be very logical in their decisions they make. I wouldn't want him to, then why are we doing philosophy? We do philosophy, we do logic to making sure that we try to epocalize, we have to bracket the emotions and bias. And so my point is, when you compare the decision making for AI and then that of anthropological and human decision making, you tend to, it seems to me that you are like saying that of human decision making is not very much logical. It's influenced by other things. But my point is that in practice, we want people to make decisions without being influenced by bias and prejudices and the past and the history. Even we want the lawyer, we want the judge to make decisions based on the letters of the law. Not being biased by emotions or by feelings or by what he thinks may happen if you take. So he wants you to follow the law. And that I was wanting to be very brutal by the tests of the law. And that means to be logical, what the law is saying. So my point is, maybe I feel a bit, the decision, the approach to decision is a bit non-factual in the sense that I want people make decisions to be reasonable. AI should do that, and we do that. That's my point.
Thank you.
Why can't we use that?
Thank you. So I was speaking about the concept of human decision in general, the example, the illustration about the paper on the Scopus AI regarding a decision in the American Supreme Court of Justice was just an illustration. So my point was about decision, human decision in general, and by contrast with machine decision making. And my claim is that we can follow some logic, some deductions, but when we decide, we always can decide to transgress in some ways. So humans are always able to transgress or not to follow the rule that sometimes they should logically follow. So it was in the same way as Dominique Lambert in the previous conference told about it. There is an ability, an anthropological ability to take distance from the logical deductions of a formalized system or from sets of reasons, and to act in another way that was firstly expected initially. And a machine decision cannot do that. It is completely conditioned by the deductionist process it follows. So that was a big difference I wanted to highlight. And of course, when we take decisions, sometimes we are logical, we follow clear reasons that we can debate on, but sometimes we take decisions by intuition or followed by desires or values that are not at the same levels of mathematical rules or logical rules. We travel inside ourselves with different motives and different kind of reasons that guide us finally to a decision. Sometimes it's a very controlled, self-controlled process. Sometimes it's a very quick process that we don't have always the awareness of the way it has put us to take this or this decision. So it's a very complex issue.
Just one question.
Two short questions. Number one is when you say artificial intelligence, which one you are looking for? I mean, ANI, AGI, SAI. So you have some kinds of pre-understanding of AI here that I cannot see.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you have a different understanding of the possibility of that kinds of AI projects. The second one is you are in terms of on the matter of the European AI Act. Some people outside of Europe are saying not just kind of ethical reason, but more on economic critical reason. That is to say, try to prevent European market against the big tech or other highly advanced AI technology, business. But from position of Korea, South Korea or Taiwan or something like that, it's really very much cautious, and because the European market is closed for them. So they are debating, they are challenging the American market, American companies. But in between, so they have a really big problem. So what is your position on that kind of concern?
Sorry, just a very short answer because we have a strict schedule.
Yeah. So regarding your first question, the kind of AI I presuppose in my talk, I wouldn't say it's a specific AI I have as a presupposition. I would say that every AI is based on some mathematics, some deductive models and so on, which is built upon logic and mathematics. And this determines a kind of ontology for AIs. And I was relying upon this presupposition to build my reasoning. And your second question, it's clear that there has been lots of lobbying and influences from the economic actors and big industries in the building process of the AI Act. And they have tried to find an equilibrium between the protection of fundamental rights and civil society and more economic and market constraints. So it's not completely satisfactory, and we should go further in the reflection regarding the way we regulate AI on the European continent. Yeah, but perhaps we can go further in discussion together on this.
Okay, David, thank you so much again. Let's move to the next speaker. Allora, sì, alla mail di Stefano. Okay, let me introduce the next speaker, Angelo Tumminelli from the University from LUMSA. So Angelo will talk about AI and democratic freedom, the geopolitical consequences of GANs infodemia. Thank you so much, Angelo, for being here. You can start your speech.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank promoters of this conference because I think that the question of relationship between human freedom and AI and technologies in general is a very, very important topic for our world, for this time, for the presence of humanity and also for the future of humanity. The title of my paper is AI and Democratic Citizenship, the Consequences of Infodemics for Human Freedom. Introduction. My paper aims at investigating the political risks and implication for personal freedom due to the circulation of GANs technology, generative adversarial network, by presenting, in particular, an interdisciplinary mapping of the consequences related to infodemics, both at geopolitical and at individual level. About this, you can see the works of Italian scholar Chiappini, 2022. This proposal is the outcome of a research project conducted within the framework of the European project Solaris, in which LUMSA University is an active partner. The aim of Solaris is to study the effects of the use of GANs technologies on the exercise of democratic freedom and on the very lives of European citizens. For this reason, the theoretical gains to be present in my paper are aimed at questioning a manipulative use of these technologies aimed at the spread of infodemics and the assertion of authoritarian powers in order to promote humanization and ethical circulation that know how to use these tools in a fair and democratic way for the goods of all human beings involved in the current digital revolution. The process of identifying the risks of infodemics serves to define some strategic elements in order to understand the relationship between human freedom and artificial intelligence. First of all, according to me, it is necessary to identify the political actors involved in the dissemination and circulation of GANs by highlighting their interest in controlling public opinion and the ideological orientation of users. Furthermore, the paper aims to present the impact of infodemics for democratic process and the expression of political freedom. Indeed, the dissemination of deep fakes is not only capable of influencing the exercise of democracy in individual states, but governing ideologized thinking and directing citizens' political consciences. But it can even influence international dynamics by producing, for example, conflicts and polarization of political viewpoints. Thus, my paper also aims to highlight the need for responsible use of GANs technology to exercise democracy in a free and ideological manner, Through the use of an interdisciplinary methodology, the paper is divided into 3 paragraphs. The first one deals with the relationship between artificial intelligence and democratic process. The second one investigates the issue for digital colonialism. And finally, the last paragraph deals with the issue of personal identity related to the use of algorithmic systems. First paragraph, artificial intelligence and democratic process. One of the pillars of democracy is that governments should be chosen by those they will serve. But for a voter to make an informed decision, he or she must be informed. The information space has changed in recent years due to the impact of AI. These changes have influenced political communities that have become more heterogeneous due to development of social media and the use of AI in them. Numerous sources of information combined with the potential of AI to create indistinguishable false content and infodemics can create the condition for heterogeneity of opinions on political issues to prevail and hinder the creation of social political groups with similar ideas and opinions within a political community. In this way, the political community fragments into atomized individuals who do not have much relationship with each other in terms of political position, in terms of political dialogue. This phenomenon may be more pronounced in our democracies, where religious and ethnic ties within the population have dissolved. Political communities in democracies have also become less informed. The fact that there is an abundance of information that everyone can access initially means that voters would become more informed. But with the growth of social media and the use of AI to generate videos, photos, and text, the opposite effects, according to me, has occurred. AI has contributed to making information unreliable and not credible. Voters in a political community are not longer sure which information is true and which is not true. There is a problem of truth, according to me. Rather than promoting greater engagement in political process, AI may contribute to making people less inclined to engage in them. And about see the Work and Volume of Fire 2023. At the same time, political communities have become more polarized between usually opposing positions. Another phenomenon is polarization of political ideas. In this case, artificial intelligence is used to generate fake content in order to strengthen the arguments of which side. People usually look for content that confirms their previous truths and ideas, but in the pre-social media and pre-internet world. The development of social media has created an explosion of this type of content and made its distribution almost instantaneous. So people become more convinced of their belief due to the plausibility of AI-created videos, text, and photo, and are less inclined to change their previous ideas and switch political sides within a community. The dangers, according to me, of the use of AI, as described above, cannot be totally attributed to AI, but mainly, this is the point, to human nature and the way it views political engagement, democracy, elections, and the reception of information within society. Second paragraph, high-tech colonialism or colonization. About this spoke also this morning, Professor. Another very relevant aspect related to the impact of generative adversarial network on political freedom is the so-called high-tech colonization. This is a form of digital colonization where the use of digital technologies is aimed at the political, economical, and social domination of another nation or ideological group. Whereas with classical colonialism, Western nations cede foreign land and appropriated indigenous knowledge in order to incorporate it into industrial process, with the advent of digital colonialism, the spread of digital technologies and artificial intelligence has become deeply integrated with the conventional tools of capitalism and authoritarian governance, such as labor exploitation, policy capture, economic planning, intelligence, rallying, so on. The privatization of software has been accompanied by the rapid centralization of internet in the hands of intermediary service providers, such as Facebook, Google. Essentially, this shift to cloud service has nullified, according to me, the freedom that FOSS license, for example, guaranteed for users, because software is run from the computer of big tech multinationals. Corporate clouds expropriate people, this is my opinion, from the ability to control our computer and our identity. This means, as Paolo Benanti, our philosopher, reminds us, to initiate an ethical transition within the use of digital technologies, and in particular artificial intelligence, in such a way that the data collected does not serve to increase the economic gain of a few technocratic elites, but is turned to the promotion of human flourishing. This is the ethic conversion, the promotion of human flourishing of persons. The last paragraph, algorithmic society and personal identity. Faced with the increasingly complex scenario of technological societies inhabited by algorithmic systems, Simona Tiribelli, an Italian scholar, professor of ethics of artificial intelligence and global justice and technology at the University of Macerata, proposes a philosophical reflection on the relationship between personal identity and algorithmic system, starting from an ethical point of view, an ethical perspective. In this last paragraph of my paper, I want to start from Tiribelli's reflection. In his recent book, entitled Personal Identity and Algorithmic System, a question of moral philosophy, the scholar asks what it means to be a person in algorithmic societies, and to what extent these systems affect the process of personal identity formation and exercise of freedom of choice of decision making. Tiribelli, on the one hand, acknowledges the enormous potentialities connected to the infosphere, to use the expression of Floridi, the possibility of establishing previous connection and generating new relational modalities, and yet does not hide the properly ethical concern related to the development of personal identities in the context of datification of reality. If indeed, on the one hand, algorithmic systems increase the human capacity for agency by promoting the right of self-determination of subjects and the enhancement of their individual and collective possibilities of action, on the other hand, this is the point, they are not exempt from important ethical risk. Studying in particular the predictive algorithmic enhancement based on individual identity profiling techniques, Tiribelli highlights how such systems are able to guide human behavior to the point of determining a true ideological manipulation of individual freedom. According to me, the novelty of Tiribelli's theoretical proposal consists precisely in not considering personal identity in exclusively informational terms. We are not a lot of data, but in assuming the ethical perspective that conceives identity as a process of maturation of the sense of existing in an integral anthropological perspective. To conclude my paper and my presentation, what is offered in my paper constitutes the outcome, as I said before, of a shared and transversal research but whose aim is to interrogate current phenomena in order to put them at the service of present and future humanity. For this reason, the theoretical gains of this research are aimed at shedding light on the risk of a manipulative use of such technologies that is directed towards the spread of infodemics and the assertion of authoritarian powers in order to promote human flourishing, to quote Aristotle, and guarantee the Aristotelian entelekia, we can say, and guaranteed the exercise of free and responsible citizenship in contemporary societies. In conclusion, it can be said that artificial intelligence system can be beneficial for human development. AI can be a gentle nudge to steer humans towards responsible choices. If, however, it is programmed to structure a good choice architecture that allow governments to protect the freedom of citizens by encouraging them to make wiser decisions and respect individual and collective freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angelo. So we can start the question time. I just have a need for, I just want a clarification because I found your talk very interesting. And so if we want to build an ethical AI or an ethical approach to AI, we need trustworthy AI. Okay. That's a very important condition, I would say. So the problem is how can we create a trustworthy AI? How can we create trust in this kind of technology? And but correct me if I'm wrong. I see just two options, kind of dilemma. On the one hand, the first option is more regulation. But the risk is over-regulation, with all the consequences you mentioned also, polarization, etc. The second option is solutions, implementing solutions, design solution into this kind of systems. This means directly acting on the design, the AI design. But this is a little bit the nudge theory, as you mentioned also. And the risk is paternalism, what we call also libertarian paternalism, which is a loss of democracy. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, thank you, Luca, for your very interesting observation. I distinguish two levels in your reflection. The first one is the problem of trust and trustworthiness. I think that we have to distinguish the trust and reliability. There are two different levels because according to me, we can speak about reliability in relationship between machine and technologies, but the trust is an anthropological dimension. So when I has reliability towards technology, in reality, I leave the trust to the programmer, to the humans that create this technology. So according to me, we can consider the reliability an extension of interpersonal trust. So we have to maintain this link between interpersonal trust and reliability between technologies and human person. The second level of your consideration is the strategy, is about the strategy. What I think about this, there is a legal level, introduce more regulation, AI Act, for example, we can say a legal level. There is another level that you quote to create inside the system regulatory ethics aboard inside the system, but according to me, there is another point. That is the education of human freedom, the education of a human identity in responsibility. So, according to me, we don't remain in a legal level. You have to observe this norm, but you have to have the responsibility. You are a human person. You have freedom, and so you have the responsibility to educate your freedom. This is the point, according to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation. It caught my attention your proposal to treat AI as a public good. I hope you can expand a little bit about that, elaborate, because I'm thinking for a public good, the main characteristic that you have is that you cannot exclude people from consumption. But being nowadays technology in the hands of a few, with the very clear possibility of exclusion, you have to pay for Wi-Fi, or you have to pay for the better forms of GPT. Is it not more a public provision of a good than a public good? So could you elaborate on that?
Thank you for your question. You asked me that to clarify the relationship between public good and my proposal. What do you think about this? I think that AI can be inclusive, but at the same time can be technocratic, exclusive. What is the crime to distinguish this? I think that AI and in general the world of internet, the infosphere, we can say, introduce new possibility in order to promote human relationship. When AI or technologies in general have the task to increase, to promote human relation, its use is ethical, according to me. When the use of AI is orientated to promote an elite of powers or elite of person, their use is not ethical. I start from an Aristotelian point of view. What is the public good for Aristotle? For Aristotle, the good is human happiness, when human lives in common happiness. If the task is this, the use of AI is ethical. If the task is not this, the use of AI is not ethical. This is the point, according to me.
Other questions? Any other question?
Secondly, do you see a possibility of training these AI engineers so that they can be responsible for what they are doing?
Very interesting point. The first one is a philosophical point. because connected the problems of human freedom and technologies with the philosophical problem of truth. What is veritas? Quid est veritas? How we can distinguish what is true and what is not true. We have a lot of, for example, generative adversarial network that becomes content very real, very similar to reality. How we can distinguish what is true, what is real, and what is not real? According to me, also in this sense, it's necessary to promote a digital education for students in the schools, starting from the schools, to educate persons to distinguish when you are in the web, what is true and what is not true. About the second point, I want to say that, according to me, it's necessary to introduce a teaching of ethics in engineering program, because we have to consider the role of programmer not only in a technical level, but also in an ethical level. So, for example, Paolo Benandi speaks about algorithmics. What is? The introduction of ethics in algorithmic system. And the first point is to educate programmer in an ethical point of view. Starting from this point, we can improve, increase ethical use of AI. This is the point, according to me. Thank you for your observation.
Okay, I think we have to end this session.